Hi, everybody. Welcome to Culturama February. Hello, and I'm so excited that we're doing this monthly. For years, it's been years to build up to the point where we could do this, and it's the blessing of Zoom. I guess it's the one of the blessings of the pandemic that we are able to do this, and that we're able to record this. You can find all of this at Culturama community blog, which I believe is culturanicommunity.com. All of our recordings are there and upcoming news for other things. Today, we're focusing on bringing joy back into writing. And this actually came from a question that David had. I'm calling you out, David, where he said, he asked, how do you get that feeling of joy back? And I think back to when I first started writing. I was, I don't know, a teenager, maybe 14, 15 years old in high school. And I got the one elective class, which seemed very exciting to me, creative writing, because I was a big reader. We had a locally famous teacher was teaching it. The person everybody said was just tremendous. And then she was accepted to an MFA and she went off to Colorado or something like the day before. And so our class was just given to the person who had a free period, who happened to be the Japanese teacher, who had never done creative writing in her whole life, and was, got this class the day before, and she came and said, I don't know. I frankly don't know what I'm talking about. But what she said was, keep a journal every day. And just write fiction. It doesn't have to it doesn't matter. I'm going to barely look at it. Just make sure you fill the pages. And that was the absolute best activity I ever had. It was fantastic. And I found so much joy in that. And it's kind of the dragon I've been chasing my whole writing career, that getting back to that emotion, which, it's just, I found it liberating. I found it really free. I could say things. Part of that is like being 15 and finally saying out loud the things that you want to say out loud, because although you're still a little bit pre-literate, you've got some sort of voice and agency and all of that sort of thing. But part of it was the lack of expectation, the lack of, and we're all trying to get back to this. I find myself sometimes, I wake up, I'm supposed to write, and it's like, oh, I've got to write. And that's not the feeling I want. And so what we're talking about today is just trying to get back to that place where this thing that that you love, why don't you love it anymore? Why are you waking up and it's difficult? Why is it tedious? By the way, next month we're going to follow this up with how to revise with joy. How to make that not a slog. Revising, there's a difference between revising and editing, and we're going to talk about that. But okay, so I'm going to start with a place where I start a lot of the time, which is with Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. And I don't know how many of you are aware of Man's Search for Meaning. It's a book that came out of the Holocaust. He was a survivor. He was a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust. And he is the person who came up with logotherapy, which says that if you can find meaning in what's happening, you can find joy in anything. Right. If you can understand the why, you can get through anything. And I summarize it this way very often. I had a terrible coach in junior high school. And what he did is he told us he just didn't want to work. He said, here's a field, run around the field. And that was PE, just run around the field. And I'd run around the hot sun, and it was awful. It was terrible. You'd just be running around this hot thing. It's Southern California. So if you've been to Southern California, inland Southern California at that, so, and it's the 80s. So it's like, no, I guess it was the 70s. So it was a stage something smog alert every single day. And then the next year I went to high school and I got really into cross country. And I was like focused on it. I wanted to be the best cross country runner in the world. Didn't happen because I'm too big for cross country, but that's okay. And I still found joy in improving and doing this. And what my coach said this year, and it was really joyful, he said, run around this field over and over and over again. And I did. And it was so great because I could see myself improving. I could see myself doing it. It was exactly the same activity. But one had purpose and meaning and one didn't. Right. And so the same activity transformed itself based on this. And what Frankl says is that self-actualization, good work, comes as a byproduct, not as the goal. So if what you're working for is self-actualization, right? I want to find joy here of what you're working for is I want to produce something extraordinary here. Well, that's not going to happen. It comes as byproduct, right? As you were searching for that thing that is larger than you, that you found that is beautiful. When I first started writing, I started writing flash fiction. Not when I first started writing. When I was in my MFA, I discovered flash fiction, and I was writing, and people liked it, and then I started sending it out for publication. And this was before flash fiction was had a name. There were people who were doing it, but didn't really have. Nobody was like talking about it, and so I got a lot of rejections. The kinds of rejection were things like, "Is that it? Like this is like a half-page story. What are you talking about? This is we need at least 20 pages to form something." And incorrectly, I listened to that, which was a mistake. And I started trying to write novels, and I started trying to write what I thought other people would like, that sort of thing. And that does not work. It did not work for me. First thing it did was it took the joy out of it. Second thing it did is I wasn't writing very well. And when I say writing well, that's a couple of different things. Number one, it's writing stuff that other people want to read. But number two, and I think more importantly, writing something that I want to read, something that feeds me, right? Something that does something for me. And had I been focused on that, I would have had things that really were meaningful to me. Okay, so what is it I'm talking about here? I'm talking about how do you get back the joy of writing, and maybe what is the joy of writing? What does that even mean? For me, and I think for a lot of people, what that is expressing things, big and small, that I haven't seen expressed before. And finally, I'm able to say, yes, that's it. That's what I'm feeling. That's why I'm feeling. This is the thing, right? And really cluing into something that inside me that is significant, that I've been trying to work through. It's another way of saying it. It's me entering into dream time, right, and into this dream world, and the people who play didgeridoos say that's the point. The people who can do the actual circular breathing and all that. That's the point of the didgeridoo. You can enter into dream time and explore different things within that dream time. And for me, it's the same with writing, right? These things that I can't totally express in an essay or in a clear sentence, because if I could, I would do that. It's now coming out as fiction, because that's the only way I can really express those things. And we're about to get a train passing by. I don't know if you can hear that or not. That happens very often with me because we're right by the train tracks here. Okay, so and the only way I can't force myself to enter into that dream time. I know I can just follow those things that suddenly I'm passionate about. Oh, good. I'm glad. It's loud here. I can enter into the things that I'm passionate about, and so I don't do things like write novels anymore, because novels, I'm not a novel writer. That's not what I'm trying to express, right? It's that's right. Now the what the joy of artistic genius is for the reader is acknowledging that, saying, oh, this other person's having that same sort of thing, is expressing something that cannot be expressed in any other way. And there are times, I know we've all had this. Anybody who's here is going to have the experience. You were dealing with something, you were at a certain age, and the right book hit you at the right time, and suddenly it just totally made sense, and everything was transformed for you. I've had a number of this. Strangely and sadly, Graham Greene. Graham Greene, I love as a writer, but God, if you identify with that you're at a low point in your life, right? But also Roald Dahl. Actually, that's a little bit weird too. And we could just go down my psychosis, one author after the other. But that's what we're looking for as readers, expressing something that we couldn't really have expressed ourselves, and that's going to come only as byproduct, only as like you working for your own thing in your own way, trying to capture. So one of the things that we do that is a mistake is we try to write somebody else's novel. Oh, that was successful, therefore I need to do that. We try to rise to other people's expectation. Every single successful novel, and I mean successful both in terms of prestige, but also in terms of successful for the writer themselves. Every successful novel, story, whatever, has been groundbreaking, innovative in some way, right? And so you think of what are the classics. When we think classic American, we think of Hemingway. Well, Hemingway was successful because it was so radical what he was doing, right? And we now think of this as being standard. It wasn't at the time. That was the whole point of the Lost Generation. They'd been forgotten. They'd been moved away from, and he was expressing something that nobody else was expressing in a way nobody else was doing it. And who are others? I've been reading a lot of, who's that writer who did all this World War I novels? What's it? Pat Barker. Pat Barker's novels. Oh my God, I don't know if you've read Pat Barker. She has an absolutely brilliant take on historical fiction, right? Different than anybody I've ever seen. And I'm not saying anything new here. She's been writing for 40 years or something. Right, she's approaching this in this. So one of those things is to move away from expectation. I'm going to tell another story about somebody who was hoping was going to be here. But it was a writer I had, he was my student maybe 15 years ago. And he loved Stephen King. And so he's writing all this horror stuff. And it was, I'm not a horror writer, but I enjoy it. It's really interesting. He was doing really well with it. And he made the statement like, okay, well, now I have to stop reading Stephen King and I have to stop writing horror. And I'm like, why do you have to do that? I said, well, I want to be recognized. I want to be published. I want to make a career of this. Like, I don't know who told him that he shouldn't be writing the thing that he loved the most, but somebody did. Something inside him had sparked that, and he stopped writing horror. And he finally he's back to writing it, which I think is great, if he wants to, right? But it's this expectation that kind of killed it for him. And he wrote a fiction that it was kind of the sort of magical realism, and somebody must have turned him on to a magical realist writer and told him that's the way you should go. And it's the way a lot of people should go, but not him. Okay, so we're gonna ask some questions here and try to answer some questions. And I'm going to ask you to throw in some stuff. And maybe see if you can identify yourself with this. I can certainly identify myself with every single thing that I'm going to say here. The big question is to start off with is how do we lose joy in our writing? Number one, when I have tried to meet someone else's expectation, and we've already talked about that a little bit. I've got a novel that I wrote that I think of as a bad novel. People who have read it have enjoyed it. Some have hated it. But I think it's a bad novel because it didn't feed me. Right? It's like, it was actually the first novel of what I hope to be a 9-part series in which the character devolved into self-hatred and loathing because he was killing people, and it's like at the end of the first novel, it was just the start of the arc, so he was really happy, and then I canceled the novel, so I gave exactly the wrong message that I intended to give. But also, I'm glad I didn't continue with it because it really wasn't feeding what I was doing. We'll often do this with style and subject matter. So we say, well, this isn't really something that I should write. This is not something that I'm seeing in the bookshelves, and that to me is the saddest, because the subject matter that we see on bookshelves is highly dominated by people who look just like me, right? It's the publishing industry is very white, very male. And we're missing a lot of those voices because of a couple of things. First of all, we've got gatekeepers. And second of all, we as writers say, well, maybe I should try to do this. And those books are great. Those books that I'm reading are great. But I do believe that the complicated interior life of middle-aged men has been covered fairly well. And we could maybe take a look at some other points of view as well. Unless you, like me, happen to be a complicated middle-aged man, right? And then it's, go for it. And so very often we will ignore subject matter. And I come from the Inland Empire, and sometimes when I was starting off, actually, I get the about half of my students write stories about people from New York, and the question I always ask is, have you been to New York? And universally they say no. So like you probably I don't know. I was in New York in 1975, but I'm guessing it's changed. I'm guessing there's something else going on. Why then are you not writing about this? It's because they don't see here as being significant. They don't see the problems of here as being significant, or the joys of being here. The Inland Empire is a strange and wonderful place, and it's deserves to be written about, and it deserves to be seen. I love those writers who can really capture place. And I'm looking at Hazel and thinking of Fresno and of Soroyan, right? And Soroyan, who captures Fresno, or at least the Central Valley, brilliantly, right? It's just absolutely wonderful. And it's not a place, I think it's a place that a lot of people talk badly about. And therefore, writers there very often feel they can't write about it. And so that cuts us off. New York has been written about, right? You can write about wherever it is that you are. I'm in a place. It's such a strange place where I live. Maybe 20 years ago, the area around me was completely empty. I'm in downtown Ontario, so this building has been here since 1916, which does not sound very long to Nina probably, but for us, this is like the oldest building in the area. I don't know what the oldest building in your area is. Probably something like the year one. But but yeah, I mean it's so. And in the last 20 years, it's grown crazily to the point where we now have traffic, right? And we have we have buildings and stores. So that's a really interesting place to write about. Like, who else has ever seen that happen? I'd love to see people write about that. Okay. Number one reason we lose the joy. Number two, we feel that we have to be productive in some way. In other words, we have to produce for some sort of outside sort thing. Now that's an interesting trap. There's nothing wrong with having goals and having ambition, but when your goal is vague, that makes it almost impossible to achieve that ambition, because what'll happen is you'll say, well, I just want to get my work out there. It's being an artist. That's one of the only groups of people who will say something like that. You'll never meet a doctor who will say, I just want to go out in the street and have people let me cut them open and sew them back up. It's not a definable goal. It's not a realistic or achievable goal. Lawyers aren't just standing on the side of the street saying, I don't even care about the money. I just want a lawyer. Like, no, what, and it makes it very difficult, because what happens is you'll publish and you'll think to yourself, yeah, well, I published here, but that's not what I meant when I said I wanted to get what I really meant was, it's this ever lengthening, undefinable, whatever. However, if you choose a goal, something specific and distant, and it doesn't seem realistic to you, you can have markers to achieve that goal. I want to have a bestseller from HarperCollins. Okay, if that's what feeds you, that's great. And then you know what you have to do to accomplish that, and you can see yourself getting closer to it. Whether or not you achieve that, you have pleasure in the accomplishment. You have joy in getting closer and closer to it, if you see what I'm saying. I always say choose something that feels unrealistic. Mine is I'm going to be the poet laureate of California. Probably won't. I don't even think I should, because I think it's white middle-aged men have been well represented. But if I do everything I need to do in order to become that, I have a life that feeds me. I have a life that brings me joy. I have a life that matters to me, and that's what matters, right? What I've done is I've identified those things that matter to me. Poet laureate is about writing, and also about cultural outreach and talking to people about writing. Bless you. And so, yeah, that's what I like to do. I know that this right now helps to feed that goal. And I know that this right here is something that brings me joy, because I like talking to people about this stuff. So it's okay to be ambitious, but to have this sort of free-floating ambition, free-floating need that sometimes is very painful. It's not possible to feel satisfied with that. There's negative voices in our head. That's reason number 3. I should do it like that. Deaf 3 or sign language 3. Negative voices in our head. Well, I'm sure you have this. There are people throughout your life who will be very vocal about why you're a terrible person, and they'll just come out and say right to you, I have a writing partner. He's 20 years my junior, and he stopped writing for about 5 years after we published our book, and that's because his family was saying, you know, you're very arrogant that you published this book. It was wrong of you. You were just you. Why are you trying to be somebody else? That's awful. That's an awful thing to say to somebody. You also get the very subtle negativity as well, and that comes from people dealing with their own issues. It has nothing to do with you, and that's it's still very, very difficult. And so those voices ring through you. It's like, and I don't know. You can imagine the sorts of things they say. You wrote a book about what? Okay, you know, that sort of thing. You're working on this subject, you know, or they'll say, but what do you really do for a living? That kind of thing. Oh man, I really hate that. They'll also tell you that they'll prescribe things for you, like the way as an artist you should be ambitious, the way you should be going about yourself. I get this a lot with teaching. I can't tell you how many people have told me that I don't teach for the money. Yes, I do. That's a big part of the reason I teach. You know, I obviously there are times when I'm not teaching for money, like right now. But you know, it's okay that I teach for the money. Everybody does what they do in the society for the money, right? You know, there's nothing wrong with that. People say that about artists too. I used to say it about punk rock artists. Those guys sold out, right? Okay, well, really? They sold out? They played their music in front of other people. That's selling out. What exactly did you expect them to do? I liked Band X until they sold out. It's like, well, no, that was the goal. Them transferring music from one person's ears to another, or one person's voice to the other person's ears. That's what's supposed to happen. Okay, so watch out for those negative voices. The idea that you have to be monetarily productive, I think it's good if you are, but that's if you're not making money on it, just keep working at it. And I think either you will or you won't, but that's shouldn't be the thing that stops you from doing the thing that you love. There's a belief that their own stories are not worth telling. Their own points of view aren't worth telling. You'll see this with people who sometimes it'll be called trusting your reader, but the truth is it's trusting your own talent. And so you'll see people just like they'll write a paragraph brilliantly put together, and at the end they'll put a couple of sentences where they explain the meaning of the paragraph, right? And said, and that means that he was happy. It's like, well, that's I think expressing a much deeper problem, and that deeper problem is that they're not trusting that what is meaningful for them is meaningful for other people, and that's a really difficult thing. There's kind of you know what yo-yo dieting is, or binge and purge dieting, right? People would do that with writing too. They'll say, okay, well, right now I want to be productive. I want to write, you know, a story every week. And so they'll miss a week and they'll say, okay, well, that's okay. Next week I'll write 2 stories. And that seems like a lot. And so, you know, the next week I'll do 3, and so on and so forth. What I always say is the most difficult part of exercising is putting on your gym shoes, right? And the same thing with writing. The most difficult part of writing is sitting down in front of the computer or notepad or whatever you do, and just getting started, right? It's made more difficult when you're following the sorts of binge and purge. I feel I'm going to wrap up my writing with all this guilt. Like, I didn't do my 500 words today, so I'll do 1,000 tomorrow, which becomes 1,500, which becomes 2,000, which becomes. Now just sit down and do some writing. If you can keep yourself to some sort of goal, that's great. If not, well, the people who are successful dieters aren't the people who never mess up. It's the people who get back on it and say, okay, well, yesterday was yesterday. I've got to eat healthily for today. I want to be a healthy person, right? Same thing with writing. I want to be a healthy writer. I'm doing this in letters, so I've lost the number. Number G is prioritizing other people over yourself. I do this prioritizing the concept of being productive, right? As though writing and finding joy is not in its own way productive. But I find that as I sit down to write, the first thing comes to my mind is I could really be doing something else, anything else. I can see my my whole house from here. I'm like, I can see whatever it is that I should be doing, right? This to me comes very much with my students. I'm starting to get some light glare here. That's why I put on my hat, because my hair is so white that it starts to glare. I start thinking about I could be grading right now. I could be doing whatever. Yes, and you could also be writing, right? Just because you enjoy it, it doesn't make it bad. And so we need to remember that. Right? I come from Quaker people who they're not Puritans technically, but man, they've got that attitude. And we could be doing more work now, couldn't we? And you should feel guilty if you haven't done work. No. And another reason this is the final one before I'm going to start asking you questions, is we stop reading. And so that makes writing very difficult. We start reading current modern things, and we feel that I think I watch TV too. I enjoy TV. I play video games. If you don't play video games, you're missing a whole different artistic expression that's new for today. It's not Pac-Man anymore. But I also read current work, and that feeds me, and it also spurs new ideas. I find in those periods, especially when I'm teaching literature, I often will not read current literature. So if I'm teaching 19th century literature, I'm invested in reading 19th century literature at that time, and then I try to sit down to write, and the ideas don't come the same way or as much. It's like, well, I've been working with Twain, and Twain had a lot of good things to say in the 19th century, and even in a little bit of the 20th, but it doesn't. Those conditions do not exist today. And in fact, the way he's writing is going to be different. The reasons we read are different than they are now, right? And it's I like to keep current. I like to read stuff. So if I'm reading, ideally, I will go and I subscribe to Harper's Magazine because I like Harper's a lot, especially the reporting. And I like Ellery Queen a lot. I'll describe that. But also, I kind of bounce around my favorite internet websites that are magazines, like Passages North. I like a lot, and I like Shark Reef a lot. And shout out to Stephanie here, who publishes Shark Reef. And I like the LA Review, and so I'll read those magazines in the morning in part or in whole, and that keeps me focused on current stuff. If you don't do that, I remember I was reading The Scarlet Letter, and I'd forgotten how terrible that novel is, but I was teaching it, right? But like as a reader for today, oh my God, no. But it really affected. I couldn't pick up the pen. It was very difficult. So okay, so I've been jibber jabbering for a while now. What are some of the reasons when you have lost joy in your writing? I wonder if we could. Do these sound familiar? Or are there other things as well? Yeah, Donna. But you're muted.
There we go. Is that better? Okay, so yeah, they all sound familiar. I think for me, there's the negative voice is probably the biggest, and yet there's points where I can overcome it. I can look at my work and go, wow, I'm happy with that. That's good. And then it gets to the critique period. Like, would someone read this and tell me, validate me? And I'm learning the craft. So there's this balance of I'm open, please help me, teach me a way to do this better craft wise. Mm-hmm. And yet I'm not convinced of the criticism that I get. Some of it is so far out there that I know that I can discount it. Some of it has some validity. And the more I hear that, then what it's doing is validating the negative voices that I already had, rather than maybe the positive ones. And then there's this struggle to, okay, I can overcome that, keep going. The better I get at the craft, the quieter the negative voices will get. And then I had actually gotten a novel to the point of shopping to an agent. And what I got from many of them was, oh, you're in the wrong genre. You need to make this change. You need to, I had a 13-year-old protagonist. So it's like either make her a little bit older so that we can make this young adult, or dumb down your writing so that we can make it middle school. And I'm like, but this is an adult novel. This is for anyone who is 13 ever. Not, I'm not trying to write for young adult. Well, but if you could just make this change and that change and that change, and I could, but there went my joy. That was not the novel that I wanted to write. So after several years of going through this, I end up pretty much where I started. I don't know how good I am at my crafts. I don't know who to listen to. If I try to write for someone else, it's not what I'm trying to write. So then it gets to just stop. And if I'm going to write, I'm writing for me, and I very, very choosy about who I show it to. So it's not out there for the world in the publication. It's just maybe, as you said, that expression of yourself or myself. And there it should stay, because that's the only place I find the joy.
I hope I haven't underplayed the importance of publishing, because I think it is important. I think here's the reason I think it's important is that life is lonely and difficult and hard, and it's made more beautiful when and more possible when I read your writing, right? That's I think the ultimate purpose of it. And it's great when we get paid too, right? But if that's the byproduct, as Frankl would say. That's not the, you don't make that the goal. Although there's nothing wrong with it, right? So I think Kate has something to add to.
Yeah, this is just in response to what Donna was saying, and I identify with that a lot. But that was one of the things I learned in terms of sending a lot of things out that were shorter than what I thought I wanted to write. In other words, flash fiction or poetry or a short story or something like that. There are so many literary journals out there. What is it, over 7,000 or something? You're going to find a fit, and you're going to get that kind of positive response. And I think it seems to me that just looking at the numbers, there's a better chance of that when you're writing something that's shorter. I have been surprised when I've gotten published, and I'm thinking, maybe this is the kind of writing that I ought to be doing, the flash fiction or the story or the poetry. So maybe that's an option. I'm just throwing that out.
And I'm going to do two things. First is I'm going to say this is a big question, and I'd like to work with you privately. Maybe we could. It might take a few hours and we get someplace. But also, we've got a real expert here named Bonnie Hearn-Hill, and I think she's got something to say.
Here's what I'd like to say. Hi, you guys. Hi, Stephanie. Hi, Anne, Hazel, Annie, baby. I miss you and the dog. So what I'd like to say to you, Donna, because I've looked at your work, and I think I've seen your work in one of these, maybe not. But John's right. We write for pure joy. And then some of us write for a living. And I'm one of those people who do that. And I'm blessed that I haven't lost my joy. But what I would like to tell you is that when you do something like submit to literary agencies versus what Kate said about submitting to journals, you're asking that person to invest in you, because they will make 15% of, and the fact that you're getting feedback at all is great, because they're thinking maybe you have something there, but they have to pay their rent and their cat food bills on 15% of what they sell your work for. So when they tell you make it this or that, you don't necessarily have to take that, unless you're crazy enough to do what I do and actually do this for a living and support a literary agent. You can still do what Kate suggested, which is look at other markets, look at smaller markets, but don't be querying literary agents unless you're willing and able to support one with 15% of what they sell your work for. So I hope you find that encouraging, because you have to decide where you're happy, and it's all about where you're happy. I'm happy here. Other people would rather put pins in their eyes. John's published all over the universe and can do anything he wants. I think he's pretty happy. I think he's pretty content with what he's doing. So it's just what, don't be out looking for literary agents unless you want to be a commercial writer.
Yeah, yeah. What a literary agent is trying to do is make money, right? And so they're talking about the easiest ways for them to make money, which is fine. But but I'm absolutely certain your book can get published. It just depends on what your goals are for that book. I'm positive. So go ahead.
Oh no, I'm saying you both make a lot of sense, and I think that was my I don't know, my arrogance or my flaw, that of course they were going to love it just as it was, without the commercial twist that they needed to make their living.
Yeah, you know what? The fact that they wrote back to you means that they did love it as it was, and they want you to change it so they can make money on it. Right?
So both, right?
Yeah. So,
Okay.
with they're really not going to write you back unless it's something that's spectacular. They've got a lot to do with their time. They've and if they're actually taking the time to say, this is what I'm saying, it means that they loved it. I was a magazine. I was fiction editor for a magazine for 20 years, and I wrote to, I don't know, maybe 10 people a year. When it was mostly, it's just like, okay, I can't take this. It's not because I didn't want to talk to all these people. It's that, like, I have another job, and I've got I should spend time with Anne if we're here. All that stuff. So yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And but let me work with you. Let's see if we can talk about where we can get this out to. I'm happy to talk. And then Andrea said lack of motivation. I think that's a real thing. Like you, and I know, Andrea, you were in your first couple of years of teaching at college level, and I know how incredibly difficult that is. Oh yeah, Lisa, I'll talk about that in a second. I know how incredibly difficult motivation is, but remember, there's a reason that you like writing. Go back to that, right? Part of that lack of motivation is you're trying to fulfill other people's expectations, trying to write the novel of that really isn't yours, it's somebody else's. Think about what I said about being 15 and having that journal and what was motivating me. I was able to write about myself and my own pain, my own problems, my own joys, and I think that's part of it. And sometimes when we're just trying to write, there's 1 month a year that I don't write, and that's during Culturama, because I'm working so hard during that. That's that I've got my own classes. It also happens to be, coincidentally, when all of the work for the adjunct coordinator on campus comes due, and I am the adjunct coordinator, and so it's this confluence of three big things. And so I don't write during that time. And then when I get back in December and I start writing, my writing sucks. It's terrible. I haven't written for a month. It's terrible. And one of my great joys is allowing my writing to be terrible for a while. Right? I'll actually, if it sucks, it sucks. That's fine. I'm going to enjoy the process, and that's part of that lack of motivation, Andrea. Is like you write something and there's a disconnect because you are very sensitive and you're a good writer, and you're good enough to realize that what you're writing isn't very good during those times, and it's just a matter of pushing through that, and that's, I think, part of that lack of motivation. And so, like, I'm a really sensitive reader. I'm good at reading. I do book reviews all the time. I'm a fantastic reader, and when I read my own stuff, sometimes I'll get, oh my God, that's trash, and I'm right, but it's okay, right? That's absolutely okay, right? Not everything is gonna. There's it's just the stuff that I need to get out before I get to the stuff that I enjoy. Imposter syndrome, yeah, Elisa, absolutely. I feel such imposter syndrome myself. I'm in front of a classroom looking at these people and think somebody's going to tell me I'm full of crap, and they're right. Um, and same with writing. It's like, I made the dumbest mistake when I was about 24, and I stumbled across Steinbeck's letters. It's a great book. It's about that thick, and it contains all of Steinbeck's letters, and it's done chronologically. So I said, you know what? I'm going to read this chronologically. I'm going to read all of his letters from when he was 24. Next year, I'll read all of his letters from when he was 25, and et cetera, et cetera. And boy, if you want to trigger imposter syndrome, that's a really great way of doing it. It's like, okay, well, he's now 30 something and writing some of the most well-renowned books that have ever been written. He's now, and suddenly I'm trying to compare myself to Steinbeck. That's a stupid thing to do, right? That's a really, really stupid thing, but it's also very natural, right? And it's what we do. We're comparing ourselves to others always, and that's bad comparison. The fact is that I will never be Steinbeck, but Steinbeck will never be Branningham, right? And that's true of you too, right? You, Lisa, will never be Joan Didion, but Joan Didion will never be you, and that's a really good thing, right? You were writing your own realities, and that's great. Oh yeah, Marta, I write memoir, and when the event is too painful, I just lost it. Too traumatic, I get paralyzed. I cannot put it in writing. Some of it may be growing up with mom who frequently said never put anything in writing that you wouldn't want someone else to find. I think, yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of us. Even if you're not directly writing about your life, you are very often writing about your life. Now, this is really important. I think when it gets to be too painful, it's really important to stop. If you've listened to Ken Johnson's discussions about writing about trauma, this stuff can be more painful than the actual initial trauma, and you need to, when you're dealing with this kind of thing, work with a psychotherapist, right? Really work, if you're really going into that deep dark hole, understand that you need to work professionally. It's important to write, and I think it's good to write, but also it's good to avoid self-harm, and this can be very, very damaging. So yeah, absolutely. Somebody asked me to go back over to, a couple of people asked me to go back to Rooney. What did Rooney say? Oh, okay, yeah, I totally missed that. Oh boy, isn't that ironic, but something. Not seeing enough of voices in the world like mine out. Publishing is an ivory tower, and if you are a person of color, it's even more demoralizing. I got frightened there because I don't know how to pronounce that. Do I do BIPOC, or do you say it out? Okay. Yeah, I can't imagine. I am now not going to white mansplain to you. Although you should be doing this, but I can understand how. No, I can't understand. I don't know. It's absolutely there's not enough diversity. Part of the problem is the big publishers are hiring friends, right? And hiring from certain colleges with, Emerson University in Boston being a huge feeder into this. And these universities are very much traditional white male sorts of places. How do we break through that? I don't know. I know that we need to. And so, yeah, how do we, I'm now trying to answer how to try to fix racism from my point of view, and that's not a very easy thing. How do you deal with that, Rudy?
What I've found is I'm finding more success in getting published the less cultural markers I include in what I submit. And it's easier to get published as a person of color if it assuages some kind of white aesthetic, which is very difficult pill to swallow for me.
Yeah.
I'm happier when I write my own truth, but that may mean that I have a much
John?
Yeah.
there,
I think
unless
that's
it's in a
changing
journal
to
or a
some.
publication that focuses on those people. Pardon?
And Bonnie had something.
Yes, since Black Lives Matters, there have been a lot of changes at some of the publishing houses where they've actually started separate imprints. One of my clients, as you know, my agent signs no one. And I don't know the last time she signed a new client, probably 10, 15 years ago. She just signed one of my clients who is writing a powerful, powerful book called, it is called Black Resilience. He's an attorney with the law firm where the Obamas both worked. And so it's still not easy. It's not easy for women. You know, in my field, we're now writing 50% of the mystery genre, and the guys are saying we're taking over.
I think it's a step in the right direction to start a separate imprint, but that's a colonization in and of itself.
Sure it is.
So
Sure
it's
it is.
not a seat at the table. It's like, we're going to set you a new table and y'all sit over there.
And who said if they don't set you a seat at the table, bring your own chair?
Yeah, it's just hip checking someone out of the way to make
But
space for
if you
chair.
get your voice heard, you know, if you get your voice heard, then at least it's a step in the right direction. We're talking about how to get our voices heard, and it's not easy.
Yeah, I guess it's exhaustion. I'm burning out with
Yeah,
all of this.
Yeah.
it is exhausting.
Keep writing, and people are like, oh, you're a great example of this, but like, you're still a token, or you're still, I know I'm preaching to the choir in a lot of ways, but it's still a monolithic place if you're a woman, and if you're a woman of color, God help you.
Which is extraordinary, because the reason, at least I read, part of the reason is I want to hear other people's voices. I want to understand culture and community from other perspectives than my own. Yeah, I think that's, I think you're right, Bonnie. And I think but it's just a step, right? It's interesting. I'm not sure how to change that, except for getting the people in power, diversifying people in power. I think that's the.
You know, in a way, it comes down to money, because that's what they really care about. They don't really care about, well, I can't say they don't care about, but they are in business to make money. And I remember what happened with Black voices and Black women voices. I remember a time, because of my age, when all we had was Toni Morrison telling white people what Black people were like. And then, oh my gosh, the publishers figured out Black people can read. And then we had all these Black voices that were not telling white people about Black people, but that were there for all readers and all cultures. And I saw that change, and it changed because of money. It changed because of the books that were being purchased and the magazines that were being sold. And I think the change was economic. And I'm reminded of the grape strike in Delano, when we shut down the vineyards of Delano so farm workers could have rights. It was economic. Nobody would help us until those grapes rotted on the vines. So I'm thinking it's like, what books do we buy? What magazines do we buy? What do we spend our money on?
What books do you review? Yeah. So maybe we start by celebrating those authors who have broken through.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. Okay. So we've talked about when you lost your joy for writing. Let's talk about the opposite. When have you gained your joy? When have you, like, suddenly I'm feeling joyful about what I'm writing again? So my heart aches because I'm looking at the comment sign. I'm an editor at West Trade Review, a small but growing lit journal. We've gone to press, but open again for submissions April 1st. We are featuring an African-American artist on the cover and inside color art, and we have a diverse set of authors coming out next issue. My heart aches because submissions are about a third women. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is, except for negative voices. I know I've been told by a lot of women that it's very difficult to submit, and so that's something we need to help people do if we can. There's a great, if you are if you're having a hard time with this, the great organization called Women Who Submit, who help women find places and help them actually do the job of submitting. Places like Cave Canem too, for people of color. Tiffany has a comment.
Yeah, so on the note of how to get that back, I'm just starting to, and I know that a lot of people have been through a lot of trauma in the last year. And I don't think that that's a controversial statement at all. We've all been through a completely life-changing experience, having COVID in the world. A lot of people have lost family. And I went through a really huge time of trauma in the last 3 years. And I think that there's a lot of room that we need to give ourselves to be gentle with that, to give ourselves space to work through that trauma, because that can also block some things. And when we're, just pushing and pushing and pushing and, oh, I'm not living up to it, it just kind of compounds that feeling of stress and makes it not only more difficult to write, but more difficult to work through the trauma if we're not giving ourselves that space.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say there. First of all, I want to say that I've got the experience, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, is I usually wake up at 4 and I'll take a walk at 4, and I come back and I get a shower, and by 6 o'clock I'm at the desk and I'm working. And something about COVID, it will be 9 p.m. when I get up, and I'll think, God, I got to get started to do some work. And I've worked from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. and I feel like I haven't done anything. And that's an illusion, but it's a very real feeling. So I don't know if a lot of you had that as well. Okay, and Nina, you had your hand up. Oh, I'm sorry. The other thing is, Tiffany, you've gone through a secondary trauma, which is the MFA. Tiffany just completed an MFA recently. And talk about negative voices, right? I've worked in MFAs. I work at a college right now, and that is, I can say that I've been a negative voice. One of my good friends, Jerry Laughlin, who just passed away, taught at Cal State Long Beach, where Steven Spielberg went. And he always said, I'm really glad Spielberg never took my class, because at the time I would have said that science fiction as a subliterate genre meant only for morons. And it's because he acknowledged that he was not he didn't have the right attitude. He didn't understand things well. You get a lot of that at the MFA, subtly and unsubtly.
I really, I feel that, and I'm really appreciative for these sessions and the work that you're doing, John, and everybody else, because, I brought a couple of pieces where I legitimately thought, like, am I completely wrong? Was my professor right that this just, that the pieces that I love about these pieces of writing just suck and they need to be removed? And I needed a community where, there's this looking for what's strongest about pieces instead of just trying to pull everything apart.
Yeah.
And we need different kinds of feedback at different points. But I think that, finding your community really is a huge thing, because, yeah, it completely made me feel like I couldn't tell what good writing was anymore.
Yeah, I when I was in the MFA, my master teacher was this guy named Ray, and he was like the guy who was supposed to focus everything. I finally gave Ray my thesis, and he looked at it and he said, I'm not going to read this. You know what bullshit you write when you write bullshit. Have your girlfriend figure it out. Like, okay, Ray, that is that's some negative talk there.
Yeah.
So some of you know Ray, and you could hear him saying that. Okay, we've got Nina first and Stephanie next. So Nina.
Yeah, it's just following on from what Tiffany said. I don't know that it's 100% factual, but it was an article at the beginning of lockdown over here in the UK in March from the Guardian newspaper, which is like a reputable paper. And they were saying that the part of our brain as creatives that helps us with our writing and that we use for processing our work is also the same part we use to process emotion. And because of the trauma of COVID, even if we weren't at that point being, I mean, I think by now most people know somebody that's had it or whatever over here, but you know, at that point we didn't, and there was great fear and everything. And whilst you're trying to, you know, it's all going on as on a subconscious level, but if your brain is, as most of us probably were, mainly focused on that, then it was impossible. This is why so many writers found it impossible to actually write. So yeah, be gentle on yourselves, because I think scientifically, you know, I mean, some of us could write a little bit, but yeah.
And just really quick on that note, there has been a lot of research. I have post-traumatic stress disorder from complex trauma. And yes, there's been a lot of research on the impact of trauma on the ability to access higher functions in the brain. I work in mental health. So, you know, it's one of those things that I'm very invested in. And so that, you know, without getting too deep into the science, yes, it can actually block your ability to access those higher functions in certain ways. And of course, there are ways to work through that, and therapy, and getting, you know, for some people it's medication, for some people it's going to be therapy, sometimes it's intensive therapy, sometimes it's group therapy, sometimes it's self-care. But yeah, I just wanted to re-emphasize the gentleness there, because you're right.
Yeah, I know a lot of us in the room too are also teachers, and that same kind of deal happens, right? The teaching is often traumatic, and often very creative, and so a lot of that. But I want to move quickly because I want to get to the part where we're getting our mojo back and we're getting the joy. But Stephanie, you had a quick thing you were going to say.
Yeah, I'll try to say it quickly. I just want to come back to some of the great comments made about Donna, who kind of kicked us off, and then Aruni bringing up this crucial question. And thank you so much, Aruni, talking about the issues of racism in literature itself and in kind of creative writing world. And you talked about it as the ivory tower, and I think that's just so important to say. So that means, and thinking about trauma and Tiffany's points, that means that all of us need to really approach the workshop with a lot of caution and mindfulness, because all of those issues are in the workshop. They're all there. The way, sort of, absolutely, how racism is really operative, misogyny is really operative, and again, kind of thinking in terms of intersectionality. And I guess I want to come back to Bonnie's point. Bonnie, who, by the way, is an amazingly kind reader of one's work. I have worked with her. I trust very few people to look at my work, and Bonnie is one of them. And Aruni and John and Marta and Andrew are others. So this is a wonderfully safe space. But you need to be very mindful and very cautious entering a workshop, because it may or may not be a toxic space. And I'm going to stop talking because we have more to do.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's actually one of the ways of getting your mojo back is finding that good space. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how do we bring joy back into writing, and I've got some exercises I hope I can get to. If not, that's okay. But one of those things is to find the right supportive community. I believe very much in writing in a community, so much so that I had a hard time I've had a hard time finding Inland Empire communities that I can write with, because writers around here kind of often consider me dad, and it's hard to give dad the kind of criticism he needs. So what I did was I started driving out to Fresno to work with Bonnie, because Fresno, there's a good 200 miles between these places, and nobody up there thinks of me as dad, and they just think of me as John. That's great.
John?
Yeah.
Just to lighten up the mood, I'll throw in something fun. Is I can work out all my daddy issues by critiquing your work all up and down.
Yeah. It's like, and you were never there for baseball, you know.
Don't worry, John. I don't think of you as dad.
I'm glad. Oh, that would be really weird. But it's hard. You know, I realize how hard it is to find the right writing group and the right community. So it's but it's also important. So why is it important? Because you can start to stop seeing the value in what you're doing. It's really important that people saying, "Oh yeah, this is really good. What you're saying. What you're saying is interesting." And I think that there's great value to that. Otherwise, suddenly you feel like you're just out there by yourself, and it's hard to produce. And it's easy to prioritize things above you because you're getting that really great affirmation from completing tasks that are benefiting other people. And so, like if I spend a lot of time with my students, I get that great affirmation, right? Whereas if I'm writing only for myself, only in a vacuum, I don't get any sort of affirmation at all. And I am a human being, right? And so I do need that sort of thing. So I find the right writing community is really supportive. I don't know anybody who's written well without it, with the exception of, you know, Emily Dickinson and a couple of really famous people. So how do you find it? Well, one, you've got to find people who are sensitive, right? There's a type of person, I hear this every once in a while. Somebody says, you know, people don't like me because I speak the truth. So I'll tell you the way it is. No, you're just an asshole. That's the problem there, right? You're not speaking truth. You're finding the absolute worst way of saying something and making sure that people really listen to you. And so don't go with this person. Go with the person who is really trying to help you be who you are. One of the things I say in class is it's not okay to make a comment like, I don't know how to critique this because I'm not a fantasy novelist. And I'm going to tell you how to. No, you're working with a fantasy novelist. You're going to help that person be a fantasy novelist. Don't work with people who are trying to change who you are. Romance writers get this a lot because it's a male-dominated industry and it's really, really sexist. And I worked with some romance novelists in my MFA, and I watched them being kind of denigrated by what they were doing. But of course, the romance novel is brilliant. It's really wonderful. You need to work with somebody who understands you, and even if they don't work in your genre, are working for you, right? And so you get those sorts of positive voices. I usually find about 5 people are right for a writing workshop. You know, this meeting every once in a while. You get 10 people, and that's awful. After the 6th person, it just goes on forever. You get 3 people, you don't have enough voices. You want to have a good mix of people. You want people who are they're good readers, right? So that they're able to. What I often find is people are pointing in the right area to the wrong thing, and I know that I do this as well. I'll say, well, your character Josh wouldn't have said this. You think to yourself, but my character Josh would have said this. What that person's really saying is, you have not set up for me a characterization in Josh where I understand that he would say this. So that's not, you don't change this, you change the stuff that came before, right? So you're working with people who you can trust and who have sensitivity and all that stuff. I think it's important if you get to work with people who aren't exactly like you as well, so that you're getting all of the people can call you out when you're saying something very wrong. Okay, so that's one. Now there's different types of supportive communities. There's what I've just described, which is the workshop. There are larger communities and smaller communities as well. But Culturama is obviously always open for you. Every Thursday through my gallery, I hold a free workshop. You can join me there. It's the same page. It's at 6 o'clock on Thursdays. We just sit around talking about our writing, that sort of thing. Going to readings, I think, is good for some people. Some people feel very, very uncomfortable in public settings, so that's not right for you. But finding something where people are affirming what you're doing, I think is exceptionally important. Okay. I started off this discussion by describing the journal I kept when I was 15. I continue keeping that journal, right? It's just a fiction journal. And I like this. I prefer this I've kept nonfiction personal journals in my life, but I prefer the fiction journal because it's non-directive. My mind can do whatever it wants. And so suddenly I'm writing about this character who's doing this stuff, and character might not even be doing anything in terms that's like, that anybody else would want to read, but it's me tapping into dream time. I remember at Bonnie's table, there used to be a psychiatrist who was a writer who specialized in dreams. And he always said that nightmares are not the problem, they are the solution. It's your mind giving you a solution, right? And so that's what we're doing in that nonfiction that journal is fiction journal is giving ourselves solutions to whatever we're dealing with. I'm not even sure what it is as you're doing it, not until later that you read back. That brings joy to my writing. And also I will pull stuff out of there. And I heard somebody starting to say something. No?
I'm not
Okay.
sure if it was me or someone else, but I know that one thing that I was always a nonfiction writer and a journalist, and I know I sometimes got really stuck trying to say things in just the right way. And one thing that I have found great joy in, and that has been really liberating for me, and I think it's actually related to some things that a lot of people have said, is I started writing fiction. Or writing imagined scenes, and I just found it so joyful, fun, liberating. It also strengthened my nonfiction, and I don't know. I guess I was thinking back to Donna's comment at the very beginning. You were saying, "Oh, they're telling me to do this, and they're telling me to do that." Like, if you're not loving what you're doing, then like, who wants to do it? But anyway, John, you just sort of reminded me, you're talking about dreams. And one thing I've really enjoyed tapping into is kind of a dreamlike state. And this is coming from what used to be a hardcore nonfiction journalist, and sort of trying something totally different has brought a lot of joy back to my writing.
That's great. You know what you remind me of is my wife, who, I'll show you her art here. This is the kind of thing she does. And she's like, this is a pencil, really, really intricate pencil drawing. She's got lots of them. When she went to college, her professors looked at that and said, "No, you should be doing abstract expressionism with big oil paints." Like, abstract expressionism is wonderful, but not her, right? And so, you get all these people trying to force you to do stuff. Okay, so sometimes, and Marta brought this up, we'll be writing something that's really difficult emotionally. And I think that's a point at which you should investigate, why is this difficult? I have worked with people who are writing about elves and dwarves and going around killing dragons and that sort of thing. What they're really talking about is the trauma they had when they were 12. Right. And, it's important that if you're stopping yourself there, you investigate what it is that you're doing. Why is it so hard for me to finish this thing? What is this about? Is this about the time that, name the thing that the traumatic event that happened? And maybe it's time to investigate that in writing. Maybe it's not, right? It's there. You have to deal with trauma in a really responsible way. And here's something that I really got from Bonnie. She reinforced this to me a lot, right? And something that, it's one of those things that I knew, but I needed to have it told to me again and again and again. There's a difference between, in fiction, a scene goal and on a hole in somebody's life. And if you're trying to, that seems like really small and weird and specific, but it's not at all. I'm going to type this word because I know that I say it strangely. Scene goal. I just put it in the thing. I think it comes out as seagull or something. I don't know. It's my Pittsburgh / California accent coming together and making sure that I can't pronounce anything. Okay, so it's the scene goal is that small thing that you're trying to accomplish in a goal, whereas the hole in your life is the thing that you might not be conscious about. If you're trying to write in a scene the hole in your life, it's going to be dissatisfying, frustrating, and you're never going to get to it, right? So like if you're writing about this character who is dealing with cancer, and also people aren't accepting his sexual orientation, and he's 15 years old, and that's your scene, that's very difficult. But if, however, you give that person a scene goal, he wants to, by the end of the scene, swim 30 laps, even though his coach is yelling at him and saying horrible, mean things. That's achievable. And of course, I'm talking right now about Stephanie Hammer's book, right, which we're going to be talking about later today. But the dealing with all of that, it's impossible for, first of all, it's impossible just to sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to think my way out of this problem the next half an hour, right? It just doesn't. I've got a hole in my life. My father never treated me well. Let me think my way. No, that's not, you can't possibly do it. It makes for very drab fiction. It makes it very, very difficult for you to write. It makes it really depressing. You cannot do that. However, a good scene goal would be to get a Snickers bar. Great. I want a Snickers bar. Somebody else doesn't want me to have that Snickers bar. I think I described this in the Snickers bar. Yeah. Okay. Let's do a different scene goal then. Let's think, can somebody give me a good scene goal? Yeah, Donna.
Okay, here's the one I think I told you about, and it was thanks to your workshop last month. But I had the issue of a 12-year-old boy who is an unreliable narrator, and I wanted to tell the readers that he is unreliable, that he might lie, and so I took it. The scene is he wants his friend's marble. He wants to possess his friend's marble. It gave me joy, by the way, John, to see how this all unfolded, and things that I didn't even expect. I did not know it would end as it did. It just happened for me, which was very cool. So thank you again. I can't thank you enough for that. But he just wants his friend's marble.
That's fantastic, right? That's an achievable goal. And of course, all of his issues are going to come out through that,
Yeah.
right?
Exactly.
And every narrator is unreliable, right? Because we're all talking from our own points of view, but yours might even be more unreliable if he's going to lie to us. And that's fantastic. So let's think. We could do marble. We could do a coin. Maybe it's a coin. Maybe it's a dog. Okay, so I've got a character who wants a dog. Where's my character? I just looked down and saw my dog.
Hi, Lizzie.
Can somebody give me a setting? What's our setting? Costco. Okay, so we're in Costco and we've got a dog that we have to, that is an inherently fantastic setting. My dog wanders into Costco. I think I've had nightmares like this. Actually, I had a nightmare like this just the other day. My dog was lost. And so my dog wanders into Costco, and something, as a character, there's something unreliable about me because I let my dog wander off in Costco. And I want to go in and get my dog at Costco, but I don't have a membership. Oh my God. Now suddenly I see my dog and like, I've got to get past, now I've got a scene goal. I want a Mr. Person trying to stop me from going wants B. He wants to see my thing, but I don't have the thing. I don't have the membership. I just want my dog. Right. And so now we've got conflict, but this conflict is going to raise a whole bunch of things about the hole in my life. Who am I as a person? That's a funny comment, Rooney. Who am I as a person who lets my dog free at Costco, right? That's a hole in my life kind of situation. That will be revealed through this dog who is truly my objective correlative, right? This dog it's the object that correlates to the deeper problems in my life, and all of that'll come through. Without that scene goal, though, it's not possible to have a kind of a joyful experience writing for most people, right? If we're talking about story. If we're not talking about story, if we're talking about vignette, perfectly possible to have no scene goal. But in a story, that is what's key. That's what's important. Okay, so I've got some exercises, but before I have any exercises, any comments or questions? Yeah, Donna.
I'm sorry. Can you explain story versus vignette?
Oh, sure. Yeah. A story is a three-part sequence. It's a character who wants something. So it's a character, desire, and then there's a conflict. I am Frank McJorgensen. I want the dog, but the Costco person is in my way. And the story aspect of this will start with that desire. It'll end with the easing of that. Vignette is fiction that is unburdened by story. I'm not sure unburdened is the right term. Uninterested in story, right? So we're just going to, now there's a lot of these that are fantastic. My very favorite is a book from the 1950s called Maud Martha. And this is done by Gwendolyn Brooks, and it's fantastic. Gwendolyn Brooks, you probably know as a poet. We real cool, we shoot pool, we, this. She wanted to write, what is it like to be a Black woman in Chicago in the 1950s? And so she just writes the everyday events, and it's absolutely fascinating book. It's fantastic. It's a wonderful book. Now this is true of everyone's experience. If you can see your life as being of value and interesting, you can write about those things that are unique to you and of value. Now, usually this comes in flash fiction because it's hard to maintain beyond this sort of thing. You'll see a lot of really great flash fiction. House on Mango Street is a really good example of a flash fiction collection with this. The longest vignette that I know is On the Road by Jack Kerouac, which is a 300-page plotless book, which is mostly interesting to young men, but it's also interesting in general. So yeah, I mean, if you've never tried this before, it's absolutely fantastic. What are some? Passages North it's a magazine. It's a English magazine that has a lot of really great vignettes. There's so many good vignette magazines out there. They won't call themselves that. They'll call themselves flash magazines. There's a lot out there. I'm sure that Shark Reef has good flash. I'm not only sure I've read good, and that's Stephanie's magazine. Yeah. So I mean, the really great thing is, Don, may I ask where you live, just generally?
I'm in Moreno Valley, Inland Empire.
Yeah. Talk about really interesting things. I would love to see people from Moreno Valley write about what's that lake? Mystic Lake, which is just a fascinating. I just discovered this. It's an ephemeral lake. It comes and goes, which is just it's such a beautiful, interesting place, and it's this great rookery. And there's all sorts of things going on there, but it's kind of a Moreno Valley specific thing. And so then you could describe both that place, but also you as a human, your interaction with that place. And it works on the level of poetry more than most fiction does.
Actually, it's in this novel that I'm writing now, but back 100 years.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've started writing about it too. I've been going there. It's absolutely mesmerizing. Okay, so good. And any other questions or comments? Okay, so we're gonna. What I'd like to do is think of 3 different ways. So I'm going to give you examples of this, but 3 different ways of when you're not feeling your mojo, how to get your mojo back. I am, and these are like prompts that you can kind of do on your own as well. I'm a writer of setting. I think of my primary goal is to write setting well, right? Because I find setting just absolutely fascinating. What is setting? It's a human being's reaction to the place that he or she is in. It's not the place as much as it is the human being's reaction. And so I can think of, let's say just Disneyland. That's a very Southern California thing to say. But I mean, when I was a child, Disneyland, just the idea of it just fired my mind like nothing else. And then my wife's, when I met my wife, she was a person who worked at Disneyland. So I went to Disneyland maybe 50 times in my 20s. And like the first time I did the rides, and then after that, I'm not interested in the rides so much. So we're wandering about, like looking at how birds live there, and how people interaction and that kind of thing. Like take a look at the details, because I didn't have any money to go on dates, but this was kind of a date, but also I wasn't interested. But my reaction tells you who I was, right? There are people who go to Disneyland at the age of 40 and absolutely love the rides and love all that Disney stuff. And I know, Andrea, you're one of that. And that's great. But what's important isn't the setting as much as it is the character's reaction to the setting. And you get a lot out of that. And so then how in the world do you write about how can setting help you get your mojo back? Well, you can go straight into a story by doing a number of things. First thing is you figure out what the setting is, and then maybe either put yourself in there or figure out who's the avatar of that setting. Avatar being misused by me at this point, right? Because it is a cultural sort of thing. But I mean, in the computer sense, who seems to kind of belong at that place? Who inhabits that place? So I think to myself of, we'll come with the setting together later. Maybe I'll set something on the freeway, right? Okay, so who is the avatar of, well, the commuter. I'm thinking about the 20-something who's on her way between work and school, right? Okay, and then I want to have a conflict, so I'm going to put somebody else in the car, right? Who else is the avatar of the freeway? The Uber driver. Okay, so now I have a story, and it's based on the setting, and there's going to be conflict, right? The student has a test to get to. She's late, and she's got a C- in the class. Oh my God, she's got to get to this thing. Uber driver wants to remain safe, right? And so now we've got a conflict that's going here. This actually doesn't sound like a terribly interesting story to me, but it's pretty good for coming up in a minute and a half. Let's get a better thing, and maybe we can start off with a better setting. We can make this specific. Most of us are Southern California, not all of us. Let's make this specific. What's a good setting? I can call on people. It's Aruni, you're good.
Oh, Trader Joe's.
Trader Joe's. Oh, fantastic. Okay, so we've got our Trader Joe's, and let's think. What do we have? No, we don't really have time. I was going to have you actually write this, but we don't have time to write it because we've got some other things going on. Trader Joe's, and who kind of belongs in Trader Joe's? Let me think of a character, even just a name. Todd.
Karen.
Todd and Karen. Oh, that is a loaded. Let's start with Todd. God, what is Todd? How old is Todd?
28.
Todd's 28. What's Todd's deal? What does Todd want right now?
Something vegan.
Something vegan. Oh, okay. So Todd is going to the vegan aisle. He's 28 years old. I see Todd in. I'm not very good with my own, because I'm a large human being. I can't wear spandex or anything like that. But I see him in something like spandex. He's what is some sort of exercise gear. He's wearing bike shorts. Okay, Todd in the bike shorts going towards the vegan aisle. And are we going to go with Karen? Or should we have some? Well, okay, so
I think we should have David come up with something. He's having too much fun.
Karen, what does Karen want? He wants the vegan. Is there non-vegan tofu? He wants the vegan hamburger.
Cashew milk.
He wants the cashew milk. What does Karen want? You know what I think? I think he got to the cashew milk first. It's the lost thing of cashew milk, and Karen wants it as well. How old is Karen?
53.
36.
53. Well, she drew on you. So 53. And okay, so now we've got a whole different issue. So you got somebody you got a Gen Xer. In her mind, Kurt Cobain is telling her to go get that cashew milk. Okay, so we've got inherent conflict here. It's very easy to come up with a story, and we off to the races. And I'm even going to start this. So the first line is Todd reached for the cashew milk, but felt a clammy hand on his shoulder. Oh man, And so already we have markers of who this character is. Setting is really more a reflection of the character than it is the actual place. He's got cashew milk and clamminess on his hand and his shoulder, right? He thinks of this as in a certain way. Okay, so that's the first way. It's just starting with setting and starting to develop this sort of thing. And as you can see, it's a lot of fun. We have brought joy to our writing. Just because of the associations that started popping up. I don't know what it is about Trader Joe and Karen, although wasn't there a famous example of this? Somebody walking through being angry about her mask. I don't know. Is that something for Trader Joe's?
Every store.
Oh, yeah. Well. The second one is ekphrasis. That's a way to bring joy back to your writing. And some of you know this term because I use it so much. Some of you don't. I can rip from the headlines. I just typed it in there, ekphrasis. It's an old Greek word. It's writing to art. Writing as a reaction to art. The most famous example is Ode on a Grecian Urn. You know this. And Keats does it well, obviously. But he's not, it's actually the oldest example anybody knows is Catullus from year 30 or something. You know, he was a Roman writer. But you can do a lot with it. You can write about the piece itself. The great thing about the modern days, the great and the terrible thing is the internet. So we now write for different things. You don't have to feel that you know, he just really describes the Portland vase. You don't need to do that. It can just be something that triggers ideas too, right? It's perfectly legitimate to ekphrasis where you don't really actually see the image anymore in it. Gerald Lachlan, who I've referenced, did really interesting things with ekphrasis, where he would just start talking about society in general because of it. Or I've seen lots of writers who don't mention the actual piece in their work. So it can do a lot of things, but you can take a look at any image. There are lots of really great websites out there. You can go to the museums themselves. You can, so you go, I am a member and I love the Norton Simon. There's a lot there. I like it to go there because it's so small, but every piece is just absolutely fantastic, right? And it does rotating. You can go there online. I also go to the Sassy Museum a lot because he's got a lot of current art. And that's really, really important to see the current stuff as well, because they're speaking a new language. I'm going to go with Edward Hopper for this. And we're going to take, just because that's kind of a classic American sort of writing. I'm going to share my screen and show you a piece. Oh, I've got to cue it up first. Sorry, this take me half a second. And Ann and I were talking about which one to do today, and we came up with this one because there's a lot going on here. And if you don't know who Edward Hopper was, he was the person who did Nighthawks. I find Edward Hopper's work interesting, and also I did a whole collection. I did part of a whole collection on Edward Hopper, and by the end, I loved his art, and I didn't like him very much as a person because he's so cut off from humanity. And his characters are always isolated in the way this character is. Okay, so if you don't recognize this is in a movie theater, and she is an usher, and she's got a job to do, so she's cut off from the very thing that's really interesting, and all these people are sort of lost. Now, I can do a number of things with this. I could write a poem about it. I could do a story from her point of view, or I could allow this to help me dream my way into another story, right, about being in the movie theater or whatever else. I find her really interesting. First of all, she's exhausted, and who wouldn't be? She's an usher who has to wear high heels, right? And she can see that with the way she's reacting to those high heels. But she's also lost in a thought. I think probably the way I would do it is I'd start here, and now somebody walks through that curtain, right? And so you've got all sorts of tensions, because her job is to make sure they're in the right place, and also to remain silent as she's talking to them, right? And so what does that person want? What is her competing things? I might also go from her point of view and try something, but it's a great way to start off. This might bring me into my own memories of movie theaters. When my wife and I were first dating, I come back to that again, we used to do a lot of theater hopping. Because we could afford a matinee, but we wanted to stay and watch many movies, so we'd sneak our way into different theaters, which was, it's a bad thing to do, but then screw AMC, who cares? And so we actually hopped into Jurassic Park, and then got so bored with it that we hopped out of it and went to some other movie, and just talking to each other about how much we hated it. And so maybe if I'd seen it from the beginning, I would have liked it. And I know I'm offending David right now because it's his favorite movie. But he's just angry. But that what did he do? Oh, he's got Jurassic Park right there. But that piece has done several things for me. One of which is bring up that memory of when my wife and I can start asking the Stephen King question, which is what if? Okay, so I'm theater hopping with my wife. What if we'd been caught? Right? That'd make an interesting story. You're on a date trying to act cool and both of you get caught and you have to call your parents at the age of 21. Really? Or what else could happen? What if I were doing this now and I was caught by my student? That'd be interesting. I've been in the theater, and like one of the ushers was my student, came in halfway through the class or halfway through the movie and poked me and said, "Look, isn't this movie great?" It's like, yeah, it was like 2 seconds ago, but there's all sorts of things that we could do. There's all sorts of what ifs, or we could inhabit the character. That'd be great. Or it's also good. You do a story of the two characters in front of that painting. And many of those, right? And then you're talking about the painting. You can go the Stephanie Barbé Hammer way, which I've done. She's a great magical realist writer, and have the painting start to talk to you, right? What would the painting say to you? And if you go into the Jesus section of the Norton Simon and you think about what all the Jesuses would say to you, then you start going down a deep dark hole, but really good for fiction. Okay, so that's my second one. My third one is just working from memory. And there are memories that occur to me again and again and again. I find myself going back to them. One of the memories that I'm going to go back to Pittsburgh now, which is where I was a young person. And I remember fiddling with my TV, like my parents were off doing something and I was behind the TV. I was very young. I was like 38. No, I was like 4. I was behind the TV, plugging and unplugging it, and I shocked myself. It's not really surprising why I remember that, right? I shocked myself with an electrical plug. I thought that if you did that, you died. It's like, I'm still alive. And so I'm sure my parents had told it, but I remember that. I also remember, I've got very specific days where I remember sledding, really, really specific days of sledding. Because, I guess part of it, because I don't sled anymore because, California. But I was an avid sledder. And so that I might write about that, or I can do things to prompt myself. One of the exercises I usually give towards the beginning of my class is remember the first time that you can remember, not the very first time, but the first time you remember being outside by yourself, right? That might be when you were 38 years old, might be when you're 12, might be when you were 2, What's the first time that you can remember being outside by yourself? For me, it's this time, it actually predates Pittsburgh. We were in Canada, and I was marching up and down like a soldier. This is a British colony, so I was marching like the soldier with the big shako, looking at a real estate sign with the soldier with the big shako, right? And he was doing the same thing. I was imitating the thing. And what I eventually realized was this was the day that I was moving out of Canada. We were moving to America, which seemed strange and exotic. And half of that's true. And so we this was really traumatic and strange for a young person. I was an American, but I'd never remembered being to America. I was too young. My parents did a lot of traveling when we were young. And so this seemed like there's a reason those memories come back to us again and again and again. There's ways of priming these as well. The Proust questionnaire is a very good way of priming these, right? And taking a look at what he says. And the New School questionnaire as well. Those are good ways. But I'm going to ask you a question here. So all of us have a very specific woman in our past or in our lives. When you think of she, that's the she, right? It could be your best friend. It could be your wife. That's what it is for me. Could be your mother. Could be. But when your go-to she, think about who that is, and then think about the moment when you realized that she was the go-to she in your life? Like somebody else had been supplanted. Like, what was that moment? And for me, it's a very specific moment. I was sitting in my friend's loft in our apartment. He was my roommate, and my wife was sitting there with her back against the wall, and I had my head on her lap, and I fell asleep right as we were having a conversation. It was like hour 15 of the conversation, so I'm not an asshole, or maybe I am, but not for that reason. But that's a very specific moment. And if you could think of that moment where you realized that she was the she of your life, that's really good. Now, so for some of you, that's your mother, and so temptation is like, well, birth. You didn't know that she was important to you at birth. There was a moment that you realized your mother was important to you, and it's like, oh, that was the thing. So I don't know. Does anybody have? We only have like 4 minutes left. Does anybody have a quick moment when she became she? I feel like picking on David because I've been doing it so much.
So there's a scene in Jurassic Park where they realize that the females are changing gender to a breed. No, I'm kidding. No, that's a good question, and I'm still thinking about it because I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. So yeah, I have to think about that.
Yeah. I can remember, like, my mother was the most important woman in my life for a little while, right? Because I was a child at some point. And I can remember her being alone in the car with her and her talking to me like I was a serious human being. And I got to sit in the front seat, which was huge, right? Because I have siblings, and I'm not the oldest, so I never got to sit in the front seat. And so I got to see in the front seat. I couldn't see over the dashboard, but none of that mattered because I was in the front seat.
So I just came up with my answer. It was driving on the 15 home from my relative's house late at night, and my mom is driving, and we're listening to 94.7 smooth jazz, The Wave, right? And yeah, and that music has always stuck with me, and so maybe that's it.
Oh, that's great. That's really interesting. And down the 15, it's a really specific place, right?
Yeah, and Merino Valley too, like by that area too. Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking Cajon Pass, but yeah.
Oh no, the south, yeah.
Okay.
Like Temecula and Lake Elsinore and all that.
Oh, that's interesting. So okay, so that's my way to bring your mojo back. And part of that too, it's something it's something you need to work on as you're going. Stay conscious of. I'm always here to help you if you're working on that and you need help. So please don't feel bad contacting me. As I always say, this is my job, right? So it's not like you're interrupting or interfering or whatever. As Lloyd and I always say, is every time that one of you does really well, we look like geniuses. So please don't feel guilty about reaching out to talk to us. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Okay, so we're gonna take yeah, great. Thank you. We're gonna take a 15-minute break and come back. And we actually only have one writer who sent in anything for the workshop, so we're gonna talk to that one writer, to Anne, and then we're going to do some other things as well. So great. I hope you come back if you're up for that. We'll be doing some writing. All right. So I'll see you in 15.
John.
Yeah.
Your audio is still on.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. Before you start talking about us.
We'll start giving away state secrets.
Right.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Still on, as long as you know.